Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a global discussion on women in law. This is a joint production by the Women's Political Collaborative of Tennessee and Sister Cities of Nashville. I'm Tabitha Robinson, and I am a board member for both WPC-TN and Sister Cities, and I'm also an attorney here in Nashville. I will be the moderator for this discussion today. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our members and our guests, near and far. Guests, if you enjoy this program today and you're interested in everything WPC-TN or Sister Cities has to offer, I invite you to visit WPCTN.org for WPC-TN and scnashville.org for Sister Cities to learn more. Just a little housekeeping, if you are a guest and you're not a panelist, please keep your microphones and cameras off. That will just allow us to make sure everything goes smoothly. With me are our panelists, Joycelyn Stevenson, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Bar Association in the United States, and Madame la Bâtonnière, Nathalie Laillé, the President of the Caen Bar Association in France. I want us to get right into the content to allow for our panelists to give us as much of their wisdom as they can. So guests, we certainly want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions for our panelists, just put them in the chat, and if we have time at the end of the program, I will relay those questions to our panelists. Joycelyn, Nathalie, thank you for being here today. Merci. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you became involved in the world of law and how you got to where you are today. Joycelyn, would you like to start off?
Sure, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I am originally from Georgia, so I'm not even originally from Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm from Macon, Georgia, and I attended college in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, and I visited Nashville and loved it and decided to go to Vanderbilt for law school, and that's how I ended up here 20 years ago. I knew I wanted to practice law very young, and so I knew that it was always a part of a passion of mine to be involved in the law and to be involved in service. I had the privilege of clerking at 3 law firms when I was in law school and loved the city here. I practiced law for 16 years at 2 law firms, served as a partner in one and a shareholder in the other, working as a labor and employment lawyer, commercial litigation, immigration. And in addition to legal practice, I also started my involvement early on in my career in bar association work. It was very important to my development as a young lawyer. And I served on several boards and committees. I had the privilege of serving as president of the Nashville Bar Association in 2016 and the Lawyers Association for Women in Nashville in 2011. They were both great experiences for me and preparing me for my current role as executive director of the Tennessee Bar Association, where I have the privilege of working on issues affecting our members all across the state.
Okay, this is our go now. Okay, Nathalie.
Je vais parler en français. Je dis ça pour notre traductrice, ça va être plus simple.
I will be speaking in French, and we have an interpreter.
Alors moi, je suis devenue avocat tardivement.
So I became a lawyer late.
In 1999. L'an 2000, en fait.
En 2000, oui.
2000.
I had a profession before.
I had another job before. Oh, yes. Sorry. Sorry.
Au début, je voulais être journaliste.
Oh. At first, I wanted to be a journalist.
Donc, j'ai fait des études de journalisme et ensuite, j'ai rencontré mon mari.
So I studied journalism, but then I met my husband.
Et ma vie a pris une toute autre tournure.
And my life took a completely different turn.
Puisque je l'ai suivi dans un projet d'ouverture de centres commerciaux. Centres commerciaux, oui.
Because I followed him in a project to open some malls, shopping malls.
Je pense que j'étais aveuglée par l'amour car ça ne me plaisait pas du tout.
I think love blinded me because I didn't enjoy that at all.
Et ce projet n'a pas vu le jour. On a travaillé ensemble pendant 4 ans et j'ai rejoint la ville de Caen dont il était originaire avec lui.
So this project never really came to fruition. I worked with him for 4 years and then came back to the city of Caen, where he was from.
Je n'étais pas canaise du tout, j'étais parisienne, j'étais née à Paris et j'ai fait toutes mes études, ma jeunesse à Paris. Donc, c'était compliqué pour moi d'arriver à Caen.
Yeah, I was not from there. I was from Paris. I was a complete Parisian, born there, studied there, grew up there. So it was complicated for me to land in Caen and to adapt there.
Et à ce moment-là, je me suis demandé ce que je voulais faire de ma vie, puisque j'avais fait des choses très différentes et je venais d'une famille qui n'était pas une famille d'avocats.
And at that point, I wondered what I wanted to do with my life because I'd been doing completely different things. And I came from a background, from a family with no lawyers.
Excepté mon beau-père, my father-in-law, qui était administrateur judiciaire. Je ne sais pas comment vous allez traduire ça.
Receivership.
Pardon? Pardon?
On dit receivership, je pense.
Receivership. Receivership. Yeah. So nobody in my family worked in nobody in my family worked in the law field except for my father-in-law who worked in receivership.
And my sister, who became a lawyer.
Oh.
So, in fact, I followed my little sister. She was my model. And I decided to start studies of law when I was pregnant of my first daughter. So I was 28 years old. So it was really a choice, and I wanted to work only in labor law. It was my favorite field, of law I like, because I had worked in a company, because just before I met my husband, just after my studies of journalism, I worked for 2 years in a big firm, which is Dassault. C'est l'équivalent de quoi aux États-Unis? Dassault Aviation, Dassault Électronique. It's a big firm of electronics. You have aviation, Dassault Aviation.
Company, parce que firm, c'est plus.
Company. Yes.
Firm, c'est plus une.
And I had seen a lot of things about social and labor, and I was interested in it. So I started my studies with the idea that I would work in this field. And it was in 1983, and I had my diploma in 1999. I started with one maternity, and I finished with the second one. And I started working in a law firm, which was generalist. I had to do all the things I didn't like, in fact, because in France, when you start as a lawyer, at that time you had to work for 2 years as a student, stagiaire, trainee. And I worked in construction, and it was awful. Building, yes. All these fields I didn't like. I went to criminal court once, but it was very interesting because I had to manage. It's the way you work in France when you start your studies. When you start in a law firm, most of the time you have to be very polyvalent, and you have to work in different fields. And after 2 years, I told them I want to work in labor law. So they didn't have enough work for that. So I worked for 1 year with a specialist. And after, I decided to be in individual practice, cabinet individuel.
Private practice?
Yes, it was in 2003.
2003?
2002. It was very quick, in fact. And since I'm still in individual
Private practice.
practice. And after a while, I decided to work for the lawyers inside the bar. And I was elected as member of the Caen Bar Association. And it was very interesting. In fact, I decided that it was time to give to my profession what it had given to me. And it was interesting. We organized a very
Symposium?
yes, a meeting
Symposium?
about labor law in 2019. And it was there were a lot of people, and after I decided that I could do more, and I think we were at a moment which was very important for our profession because of many changes in France. We will speak maybe about this later. And I decided to candidate to be director, how do you say, executive director of Bar Association, and I was elected last year, just between two periods of confinement. Confinement. So I was happy because it was just after confinement. So I say yes. Now we are going together and do things together. And in October, it was the new confinement. So it's very difficult to work with 400 lawyers. I don't know in Nashville how many lawyers you have, but 400 lawyers who cannot see each other. And we are a profession in France who love to meet each other. So it was very difficult. That's the way I could. Sorry for my English, but I try to speak direct, so it's better for you maybe.
It's great, Nathalie, and thank you for getting into that. Actually, I want to talk a little bit about the culture of your respective legal professions. So can you explain a little bit more about the culture of the practice of law in France? Like, for example, do most people work at large law firms or smaller offices? Do people want to be judges or partners in a firm? What are the most common areas of the law? Can you just tell us broadly a little bit more about that culture of practicing law? And Nathalie, I will have you go first, and Joycelyn, if you would follow that up, that would be great.
Okay. In France, we are 70,000 lawyers, maybe half in Paris, not completely half, maybe 36,000. And half of them are individual lawyers, practitioners. So it's a very special, I think in the United States it's different, but the association is not so much spread or something like that. Common, yes, thank you. I have statistics because it's serious to tell you things very, very precise. In 2019, j'ai du mal avec les années. 36% were individual, 30% practitioners were associates, 30% partners. Collaborateurs, on dit associés. Collaborateur, c'est pas pareil. Ah, okay, it's the opposite.
Yeah. Because in French we say partner is associé, and associate in English is not partner.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite, as far as I understand.
And a very, very few, around 4%, are salariés,
Workers.
workers. And for the place of women, maybe you should know also that people who are partners, in France, it's about 36%, but in the
Business law firms.
business offices,
Law
it's
firms. Law firms.
law firms. I right. In business law firms, it's only 17% who are partners. So it's not really the same persons. And you have a big majority of women, which is right now around 57%, almost 60%. And it's increasing a lot because in our schools, right now you have 70% of women. And to have an idea, in the judges in France, they are now becoming about 80% of women. This afternoon, there was a big event. It's why I asked to delay the conference, and I want to thank you for this, because we had the president of the tribunal, the court, who was installé, was settled. It's a tradition in France. And when all the judges arrived in the court, in the room, there was a kind of whispering in silence in the room, because in front of us it was 90% of women, and there was one man who was the president and some men, but there were comment dit le parquet, prosecutors, because among judges in France, the men go priority in the field of prosecutors. So it's a phenomena which is rising very fast since 2 or 3 years.
That is fascinating. And Joycelyn, would you like to follow that up?
Sure. So as far as your question about culture here in Nashville, and I am executive director of the Tennessee Bar. I was president of the Nashville Bar, and so I'm certain that some of the Nashville numbers have certainly grown over the years. But in Nashville and in Tennessee, we have about over 20,000 lawyers who are licensed in the state. Tennessee Bar has 12,000 of those as members. We're a voluntary bar association, and I know that Nashville, at least as a minimum, 4,000 to 5,000 lawyers that are licensed, and maybe more than that at this point. We have so many people, and I think similar to what Natalie was talking about, that are solos, that are in the private sector. Lawyers here practice not just in law firms, but several in the legal aid, state, local government. We have several traditional law firms with associates, which is where I started as a young lawyer, as an associate for a number of years. It used to be 1 to 8 before you became partner. Now I know it's a little bit longer for other firms, where it might be 10 to 11 to 12 years before you are even up for partner. And then we have different partnership structures, non-equity, equity tracks of partnership. Our membership for the Tennessee Bar, a lot of our lawyers, many of them are in large firms, but a large number are in smaller, less than 20-person law firms in smaller rural parts of the state. And so we are doing a lot more than our bar to try to reach our members all over the state and to make sure that people have resources and that we're providing a service to them. I'm seeing more and more law students that are graduating and starting their own practices right out of law school, or joining smaller firms right out of law school instead of going to some of the larger schools. I know that being a president, sorry, I'm hearing some feedback. Okay. One of the things too that, a question that you had mentioned was just about practice areas and the goals of being a partner and how that works in different cultures as well. I do find, at least for me now, I go and talk to a lot of law students all across the state. And the desire to be a partner is, I think, different today than it was when I was a law student, and that was a big part of my goal in going to a law firm and being a partner. I'm seeing now that a lot of young lawyers and people coming out of law school already have an idea of what their ultimate goal is, whether it's being a partner or going into a corporation or being a judge. And many people are structuring their careers from the start to reach those goals, which is a little different from when I started. And in Nashville, healthcare is a really big practice area here. We have 33 different practice group sections in the Tennessee Bar Association with different experts in different fields from across the state to try to work together, have programming, and provide resources for our members and for the public in those sections. So family law, litigation are really big areas where we've seen a lot of growth in our particular state.
Thank you, Joycelyn. One thing, Natalie, that you said that stood out to me is that women take up 70, upwards of 80% of the legal profession in France. And that's very fascinating to me. And Joycelyn, my follow-up question to you is, can you give an assessment on parity in the legal profession as they relate to women and men? Would you say it's on par? What is your assessment of that?
Well, I don't have the exact statistics on women and men on par within the U.S. or within Tennessee, but I will say I did some looking at the American Bar Association here has done a lot, as you probably know, work on women in the profession and looking at law students, looking at the rate of women in firms, the rate of women in practice. And I know that at least in 2020, they said that the women accounted for 54% of all students in law schools, but about 37% of women practiced, women lawyers. And that rate's increasing for women. I think it's for here in Nashville in particular, we have a lot of women that have made a lot of strides on the judiciary and legal executive director positions. So from a purity perspective, I think it really, if I look at our Supreme Court, which has had for a number of years majority of women, that's great. But I think if you look in other areas, you may find, particularly when women are in law firms or other places 10, 15 years out, you don't see those same high numbers. Where you see a large number of women in law school, you may see less of them in practice or practicing at the highest levels in their institutions 10 to 15 years later. So I think it really depends on what you're looking at, what area of practice, what focus, where they practice. So I think there's some gains that surely have been made, but I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do.
I think that's a great segue into our next topic. And Joycelyn, I'll start with you for this as well. I want to talk about the challenges of practicing in the legal profession as a woman. So what are some of the most significant challenges that women face who are currently practicing law or entering the profession?
Well, I think back to my comment from before is, the lingering issue that I hear a lot about and that I serve on panels about and we talk about a lot is advancement and figuring out what happens after a decade in practicing. I have several friends who we started off together with the idea of becoming a partner, and many people have done other things. They've gone to corporations, they've decided to get out of the practice, they've changed careers completely, which is wonderful. I'm not practicing law anymore. I'm executive director of a bar association, which I love. But I do find that there are concerns that I get from young lawyers and young women who are practicing about how do I have opportunity? How do I move forward or succeed? One of my mentors told me a long time ago and talked about vertical diversity and the importance of there being a pipeline of diversity at every level of whatever institution you're in, whether it's a law firm or whether it's a corporation or a legal organization, but having the ability to see people at every level to know that it's possible and to have that trajectory. And so when women leave the profession, it creates those gaps where when women come behind, you might not have mentors who are women or people that are in these significant positions who are women. And so you have to continue to try to get more people into that pipeline and to create environments and creative environments where people can have the kind of practice that they want to be fulfilled that might not fit in the mold that it did 20 years ago. And so I think that's a challenge that I see.
Thank you. Natalie, would you care to provide some input on challenges facing women in the legal profession in France?
Quels sont les challenges que les femmes doivent affronter en fait pour entrer dans la profession?
Quels sont les défis posés aux femmes?
Je dirais le premier, concilier leur vie de femme et de mère et leur vie professionnelle.
To marry to conciliate both lives, their professional and their life as a woman, as a mother.
On constate qu'il y a une forte charge mentale qui pèse sur les femmes puisqu'elles doivent concilier ces deux aspects de leur vie.
Conciliating or juggling these two aspects of their lives puts a heavy mental load on women.
Le deuxième challenge, c'est d'arriver à une égalité de rémunération avec les hommes.
The second challenge is to achieve revenue equality with men.
Puisqu'on en est extrêmement loin, il y a à peu près plus de 30% d'écart de rémunération entre les hommes et les femmes, au détriment des femmes, bien sûr, c'est pas l'inverse.
Because we're very far away from it, there are now a 30% gap between the revenues between both genders, of course, benefiting to the benefit of men.
Ensuite, je dirais que le troisième challenge, c'est d'investir davantage des terrains du droit qui sont davantage investis par les hommes. Je pense notamment au droit des affaires.
The third challenge, I would say, is to make inroads in law fields that are traditionally more reserved to men, such as business law, for instance.
Puisque les femmes sont majoritairement investies dans le domaine du droit de la famille, du droit du travail, principalement, on va dire.
Because women are mostly seen in more family law and labor law, mainly.
Et donc, en France, pour arriver à ce qu'il y ait une égalité, notamment dans la représentation dans les institutions, les barreaux, mais aussi l'autorité nationale qui est le Conseil national des barreaux, on a dû prendre un certain nombre de décisions.
And so to attain more equality in France at the level of bar associations and at the national bar association.
Donc, il a été décidé d'une parité, c'est-à-dire qu'aujourd'hui, pour entrer dans un conseil de l'ordre, on travaille avec un binôme, un homme et une femme.
So in order to work towards that parity, to that equilibrium, we now, in order to enter, you said un conseil de l'ordre, like what we call conseil de l'ordre, or it's like a board
L'assemblée,
the assembly of all bar associations. Yeah,
Yes.
You have to work in pairs, including always a man and a woman.
Par exemple, my colleague Thomas Carrera, if he wants to be member of the Conseil de l'Ordre, he will have to find obligatoirement.
Yeah. I will be obliged to find
a woman.
A woman.
So yeah, if my colleague Thomas Carrera wanted to enter that Conseil de l'Ordre, he would have to work in pair with a woman.
And le dernier challenge peut-être, c'est de changer le regard que peuvent avoir certains hommes sur les femmes dans les cabinets d'avocats, ce qu'on appelle chez nous le sexisme.
And the last challenge, or the fourth challenge, would be to change the attitude or the of men in law firms the attitude of men toward the way they look and consider women in the profession, what we call sexism.
Ce qui nous a amené à créer des référents harcèlement, si on peut dire, pour pouvoir dénoncer certaines situations que les femmes subissaient.
Un référent,
Euh,
qu'est-ce que ça veut dire?
Une personne de référence, un avocat de
Un
référence.
avocat désigné à cet effet.
Oh,
Ouais.
which is why we actually created positions for lawyers who dedicate themselves to bullying within law firms, bullying against women.
Et les avocats qui ne se comportent pas correctement peuvent faire l'objet de poursuites disciplinaires et être suspendus de leur activité pendant plusieurs mois.
And lawyers who do not follow the rules can face suspension from their, to be suspended from their practice for several months.
Cela étant, avec le phénomène importé des États-Unis, avec les différentes affaires Weinstein, etc., on a eu une libération aussi de la parole qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, je dirais, de ce fait-là et aussi du fait que le nombre de femmes augmente, ces comportements vont diminuer. Ils sont déjà en train de diminuer. Et on parle peut-être déjà d'une histoire passée. Les choses se sont extrêmement accélérées depuis 2-3 ans, depuis que les États-Unis nous ont exporté des affaires qui ont libéré beaucoup de choses chez nous.
But with the whole phenomenon that came mainly from the United States, with all the big scandals with the Harvey Weinstein and all the others, this combined, so where people are speaking up more and more, this combined with the fact that there's the number of women in the profession and in school, in law school, is accelerating and growing. This together mean that all these behaviors are changing. We're already starting to see them are more of a thing of the past, and because it's the progress has really accelerated thanks to these scandals that came from the United States principally.
Il y a aussi un critère générationnel dans la mesure où les comportements désobligeants et sexistes sont souvent le propre des plus anciennes générations. Moi, par exemple, je suis né en 1977 et je n'ai encore jamais croisé de confrères, de collègues de ma génération qui ont été reconnus ou qui ont manqué de respect aux droits des femmes. Voilà.
And I think there's a big generational aspect to consider within this change in attitudes, because for instance, I was born in 1977 and I've never come across any colleagues of my generation who had been accused or proven as having lacked respect to women in the profession.
Je pourrais donner l'exemple de... J'ai envoyé la vidéo. Il y a quelques années, c'était en moins de 10 ans, enfin 2012 ou 2014, je ne sais plus, il y a une femme qui est devenue bâtonnière et il y a un avocat d'un certain âge, effectivement, cheveux blancs, a dit, mais est-ce qu'elle a les épaules suffisamment larges pour ce rôle? Et ça a fait un buzz. Les consoeurs se sont levées, ont manifesté avec des fausses barbes. On vous enverra le lien pour que vous puissiez voir un peu en image ce que ça a provoqué. Et les réseaux sociaux se sont révoltés, on va dire. Et aujourd'hui, des choses qui étaient dites de cette manière-là ne sont plus possibles dans la mesure où elles sont tout de suite, elles entraînent tout de suite une réaction des femmes. Donc, on parle, je pense, effectivement d'une époque d'une page qui est en train de se tourner. Et c'est bien.
There was, for instance, an incident to illustrate this less than 10 years ago in 2012, 2014, when a woman was elected as the president of the Bar Association, where there was a comment, a disrespectful comment by a gray-haired lawyer of the male sex, and who asked whether she would have, if her shoulders would be strong enough for the position. And that led to an immediate reaction of the female lawyers who have demonstrated with fake beards. We'll send you the video of that so you can all see that. And it came out everywhere in the social media. And so this is why these types of behaviors now have to change, because it's just no longer acceptable. As soon as anybody makes such a comment, it goes off everywhere. And there's an immediate and strong reaction of women.
Well, Natalie, that's very enlightening. As an American female lawyer, I find it very fascinating to see the parallels with some of the same challenges that women face in the legal profession, both here in the United States and in France. And Joycelyn, I just find this line of conversation very fascinating. I wanted to follow up with you and see if you had any response to Natalie's comments.
Well, I agree with you. It's interesting, some of the parallels that she discussed. And I thought the lawyers who dedicate themselves against bullying against women, I thought was fascinating. And needing more of that is what a great thing to have. I think, similar here, we have rules and regulations, and we've tried and are continuing to try to make sure that we educate people, but also to make sure that people understand that certain things aren't okay and certain behaviors aren't okay. The American Bar Association a few years ago suggested that there be a model rule adopted in all the states to prevent and prohibit discrimination in the practice of law. They were finding, and other states were finding, that while we do have anti-discrimination laws generally for employment, lawyers, particularly in situations if there's an opposing counsel or somebody in a case, or somebody that's not necessarily your employer, does something that is discriminatory or something that's improper, that there weren't really a lot of avenues to address that. And so one of the things that many states here in the US are doing is adopting more proactive rules to govern the practice of law, so that lawyers who may not be in the same working environment as someone else would still have some sort of penalty for doing something that's offensive to another lawyer or to a woman on a case or any other situation. And so that's, the challenge there is that that's a model rule, and that can or cannot be adopted depending on what states choose to do so. And so while some states have chosen to do that, some others have not. At the local level, you'll find that many local and state bar associations are doing more to talk about professionalism, civility. More and more legal and law schools are making that a part of the curriculum, so that people are coming out of law school with an understanding of what it means to be professional, what behaviors are acceptable, what aren't. The Nashville Bar Association, for example, also, and to continue this educational piece of it, petitioned the Supreme Court in Tennessee last year to require diversity as a part of our continuing legal education requirements of 15 hours every year, to require that some of those hours be dedicated to these types of issues. And other associations also weighed in and talked about the importance of having that as a mandatory part of your education to continue to keep your license to practice to do those things. I do agree that some of it also, too, from a generational standpoint, I was born 76, and unfortunately have experienced and have seen situations in which people have experienced things that were improper. And to 20 years later, it's gotten better in some sense, but in some ways I still hear some of the same stories. And so I feel like, as bar associations and as lawyers, the more we can do to try to provide an outlet and be a mentor and help the lawyers that are coming up into the profession to understand what it means to be a professional and practicing lawyer, and to make sure that we do make it clear what's acceptable and not acceptable. Because it's a shame that some of these things are still going on, but I think some of the things that you're doing in France are great and good starts. And we're doing some things here, but obviously I know we can do more, and we'll continue to do more as we, tackle even more issues moving forward.
And Joycelyn, I'm so glad you mentioned talking and mentoring the next generation of female lawyers, female and male lawyers. And that leads me to my next point. How can women currently serving in the legal profession help support or even mentor new women attorneys that are just entering the workforce? Joycelyn, let's start again with you.
Sure. I wouldn't be here if it was not for really great mentors. Many of them are still my mentors, who helped me early on to understand the importance of my job, not just being a job, but also a service. And so I feel like as what we can do to continue to support women and to help with retention and mentoring, going into the law schools, meeting people early in the process, being a presence there and being a resource. I found that when I can get in front of law students early and follow the development, once they start practicing, we've had that the relationships been developed, it is a good starting point for a person practicing, and that helped me a lot. So I try to do the same thing. Things like this, speaking on panels, I always encourage people that I meet who are new to the practice to call people to go to lunch or coffee, or to ask them questions. And I find particularly here in Nashville and Tennessee, people are always willing to open their door and say, I might not know you, but you want information on how to be a better lawyer or about the profession, I'm happy to help you. And that's been very helpful to me. Creating networking groups for new lawyers who are women. I know that we at our bar association and many others have mentoring committees where you can join on to serve as a mentor. That's important. And then joining and being in the bar associations itself. You meet so many people and have the ability to affect so many, the careers and the lives of so many people just in bar association work. And being at the table and being a voice is also important. I've found that over the years when, put in situations where I'm on a hiring committee or diversity committee, I may be the only woman on that committee, I may be the only person of color on that committee. And it's important to have a voice and to be a voice. You're at the table, use that platform to promote things that are important and to help bring other people along with you. I think there are a lot of law firms and other groups that are doing some really creative things right now. They are doing protege programs or programs where you have shadowing with managing partners, pairing women and other diverse lawyers with equity partners, doing leadership development programs. All those things are happening at many levels already in state, local, private sector. And I think those are things that we can continue to do to make a larger impact.
Thank you, Joycelyn. Natalie, I'll pose the same question to you. How could women currently serving in the legal profession help support and mentor new women attorneys just entering the profession?
Alors là, je veux bien une traduction, Nadine.
D'accord, je suis là. Oh, pour toi, pardon.
Oui.
Pardon.
Juste la traduction de la question.
La traduction de la question, c'est comment est-ce que les femmes qui sont déjà dans la profession peuvent aider en tant que mentor, peut-être, les femmes qui arrivent dans la profession, qui finissent leurs études et qui commencent dans la profession. Voilà, comment les aider, leur rendre la vie et le progrès plus facile, l'avancement.
L'avancement, d'accord. Ok, parce que alors pour moi l'aide elle peut prendre plusieurs formes. Alors sur Paris, parce qu'effectivement c'est un très gros barreau, il y a beaucoup de réseaux de femmes qui font une forme de parrainage ou de mentorat sur des avocates plus jeunes.
So in Paris, it's a really large bar association, and there are many networks of women who organize mentoring of younger female lawyers.
Et je dirais qu'au niveau de notre barreau, à nous, il y a 60% de femmes déjà, il faut le dire, dans notre barreau. Donc, on est vraiment représentatif des chiffres que j'ai donnés tout à l'heure.
within our own local bar association, there's a 60% of women. So it's really aligned with the numbers I was giving you earlier.
Et alors, l'organisation, elle n'est pas visible, mais elle se fait assez naturellement. Par exemple, ça va être des groupes WhatsApp sur certaines audiences où on s'aperçoit que c'est principalement des femmes, parce que c'est vrai que l'entraide, c'est quelque chose qui se matérialise plus chez les femmes. Je ne sais pas pourquoi, c'est peut-être dans leur fibre. Et ça va être effectivement des réseaux d'entraide pour se substituer à des audiences, par exemple.
And so it's the organization of that mentoring in our local bar association is not that visible, but it kind of happens naturally, as if WhatsApp groups will be created, and we realize that it's mostly women, and for some reason women tend to be better at helping each others.
Et peut-être une solidarité aussi lorsqu'on s'aperçoit qu'il y a une consoeur, collègue, qui est en difficulté. Ça m'est arrivé 2 fois cette semaine d'avoir une forme de signalement d'une consoeur qui me dit bah, je sens que cette consoeur est en difficulté dans son exercice professionnel. Et la tradition chez nous, c'est qu'on appelle le bâtonnier pour signaler. Le bâtonnier se rapproche de la personne et fait ce qu'il faut pour aider, pour mettre en place des différentes choses pour se substituer, on va dire, à des difficultés. Je ne sais pas si c'est substituer, ou en tout cas pour prendre en charge les difficultés que la personne rencontre.
So, and there's solidarity that exists here, and that's something that happens traditionally within our bar association, is that if a female colleague notices that another female colleague lawyer is experiencing problems in her practice, then the tradition here is for them to call the president of the bar association and share that with them, that, hey, I've noticed that this person is going through some challenges. And then from there, the president of the bar association can see what they can do to set up some measure of help for that female lawyer who's experiencing difficulties.
Et alors ensuite, il y a aussi, alors c'est vrai que là, on axe beaucoup la discussion sur le féminin, mais il y a aussi ce qu'on appelle le jeune barreau chez nous, qui représente 70 avocats sur 400, qui est très soudé et qui organise un certain nombre d'événements pour rassembler les jeunes avocats, pour qu'ils puissent faire des échanges aussi, et en dehors du travail, peut-être extérioriser des choses qu'ils vivent à l'intérieur des cabinets pour trouver ce qu'on appelle peut-être une sorte d'analyse de pratique. Hein. Ce qu'on peut dire aussi, c'est qu'il y a eu une initiative à Caen. Il y avait des confrères qui étaient en difficulté, en charge mentale, qui n'arrivaient pas à gérer la pression de leurs clients, notamment les jeunes avocats. Alors, c'est vrai que c'est majoritairement des femmes parce qu'il y a une majorité de femmes. Et donc là, il y a eu un groupe aussi qui a été organisé avec un psychologue pour leur apprendre à gérer leur stress, mettre de la distance vis-à-vis du client et se préserver.
So let me go back. Yes, and so here we're focusing mostly on women, but I also want to talk about this initiative in our local bar association of the young barreau, that the young lawyers, who are part of the bar association, represent 70 lawyers out of the 400 that we have in the bar association, and they create events for these young lawyers to get together and to exchange their experience, to externalize what they're living within their separate law firms, and kind of have like a practice analysis and compare notes. And there's there was specifically a really good, interesting initiative here in Caen, where in order to help young lawyers who are experiencing a lot of pressure, a lot of mental pressure from their clients. And it, of course, these lawyers are a majority of women, since, as we were saying, the numbers of female lawyers are rising. So that a group was organized to support them, and part of that were a meeting with a psychologist, intervention with a psychologist to help them deal with the stress of their practice better.
Et aussi, ce qu'on peut dire aussi, c'est que le rôle du bâtonnier, c'est aussi devenu aujourd'hui, on a l'obligation d'aller vérifier dans les cabinets comment s'exerce la collaboration, donc des associates, des collaborateurs, ce qu'on appelle les associates en anglais, si effectivement ils ont un bureau, des outils de travail pour pouvoir aussi développer leur clientèle personnelle. Alors c'est peut-être une chose qu'ils ne connaissent, enfin, qui ne vivent pas aux États-Unis, puisque vous pouvez être collaborateur dans un cabinet d'avocats, travailler pour le partenaire et développer pour vous-même votre clientèle. Or, donc ce n'est pas du salariat. Et on s'aperçoit que certains collaborateurs n'arrivent pas à développer leur clientèle personnelle. Donc, on va avoir l'obligation maintenant d'aller contrôler cet exercice. Il doit être assez, je pense, peut-être choquant pour eux, parce que c'est une forme d'intrusion dans un contrôle à l'intérieur des cabinets d'avocats.
And in addition to that, it's part of the role of the bar association president is to check in the practices in law firms how the collaboration is actually happening, if it's happening in a proper way, to check that the so the partners or associates,
No,
the partners, associates. The associates have the right, the business tools they need, their offices, and the situation here may be a little bit different from the one you have in the US. Here, associates, in addition to working within the law firm, can also develop their private practice. So part of the bar association president is to check that they are indeed having this ability to develop their private practice in parallel with their work at within the law firm.
Well, thank you. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want us to wrap up with one final question. And this is an impromptu question, but I want to pose it to both of you. What advice would you have for a woman that wants to enter the profession, the legal profession? What tidbits of wisdom can you provide to them? What would you tell that person? Joyce Lynn, we'll start with you.
There's so much. I'm trying to figure out if I can say it all in a minute or less. I would say don't be afraid to lean on people and ask for help. I think for me, I tried to figure a lot of things out on my own. And I did get a lot of help, but and another piece of advice for me that I wish I could tell myself back then as well is just taking care of yourself and focusing on what's important. I know people are juggling a lot of things, particularly right now. And for me, I started my legal career at a time when I unexpectedly had to serve as a caregiver to my dad while trying to be a full-time lawyer at a law firm practicing long distance. And it was very tough. And it was very difficult those first few years. And I think it's just important to make sure, and for me, I was focused on what was important, which was my family, but also trying to also be a good lawyer. And so I think, my advice would be take care of yourself, make sure you continue to focus on your wellness and your health and your well-being, but also keep your eye on what's important and reach out to people who have done it before and, create those relationships early if you can. Don't be afraid to cold call somebody and ask for help or to ask for advice. If there's somebody that is doing what you want to do, call them or do some research and figure out what they're doing, but put in that work and that effort. And I think it will long-term be very valuable.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Joycelyn. Natalie, I'll ask you the same question. What advice would you give a young woman that wants to enter the legal profession?
I would say the same thing than Jocelyn. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And I would say also, if you have problems, just put the limit just at the beginning with your colleagues. It's very important to say, no, this I don't. I have a family, I want to go home now, and don't agree if someone give you work until the end of the night, because you have to be equalized.
Balanced.
You have a right for privacy.
It's very important. If we want to have lawyers for long, we need to protect mainly women, because it's difficult to make to have an evolution in our comment on dit, notre évolution sociétale evolution.
Societal evolution.
It takes a long, and we need to protect these women, because very soon there will be a lot in France, lawyers, and if we don't protect them, so we'll have a lack of lawyers, and it will come very, very fast. So I would advise them, take care and be professional. It's very important. Always be professional, very competent, and be passionate, because we have one of the most beautiful profession in the world. I wrote, I saw you wrote one sentence which interrogate me. You say, I mean, it's the way you see our profession in United States. You say you have one of the most powerful profession. I'm not sure it's the same thing in France. I saw this in your draft. I'm not sure we have the most powerful profession. I mean, it's not because you are a lawyer that you are very influent in France. But it's a very respected profession by the French people. They have a very strong image of what is a lawyer in France, someone who defends, someone who protects. And we are in France, and it will be my last word. We are fighting in France right now in order not to become algorithm, because it's a movement which is increasing, and maybe it would be the topic of a new conference with Nashville. Right now, we have a pressure to write in a number of words defined in the presentation of our writings, conclusion,
Summums.
And we are fighting against that. We are fighting against another evolution, which is that we won't be able to plead. Now it's written. We cannot plead, and pleading in France is something very important. So we are in à la croisée des chemins, comme on pourrait dire, dans
a crossroad. At a crossroad.
Right now, which has been increased by the COVID crisis, because we had some procedures during the COVID which was not pleading, and right now, for economic reasons mainly, our job is un peu en danger quand même, in danger, I think.
Because there is a fight, there is a kind of fight between the judges and the lawyers on that point. The judges don't want to spend their time and it's for them wasting time hearing lawyers at the bar during the hearings. So our right as lawyers to be able to plead is clearly threatened today, and that's the whole gamble for the future that we have to face, and we have to keep together, to stay together, to stick together for our rights to plead and to still exist at hearings. And this is a very, very tough fight today. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And Nathalie, I think what you just said prompted a whole new conversation, and I think a lot of us here in the United States are very interested in hearing. So perhaps that will be our next topic for another time. I really wish we had more time to talk, because this is certainly a conversation that I think I could have all day. But I will say, Nathalie, thank you, and Joycelyn, thank you for your time as well. Guests and members, thanks for tuning in. Pour nos amis en France, bonne nuit. And for our friends in the United States, have a great afternoon. And Joycelyn, Nathalie, thank you again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.